Welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. And we are on Parshat Bo. And the significance, the great significance of Parshat Bo is this is where the Torah starts with the very first commandment given to the Jewish people as a people. Even in Genesis, we have a few other commandments, but they are not being given to the Jewish people because the Jewish people didn't exist at the time. But they do here. And this is the first commandment. And we already started it. It's Exodus chapter 12. That's where this all starts. And they're being commanded regarding Pesach, the festival of Pesach, the festival of liberation. And I suspect that is this interesting, if not ironic situation, that if we are willing to take on the divine commandments, in other words, if we're willing to say, God, I give you control over my life, I am going to try to do what I understand you want of me through the Torah, that is actually liberating. That you free yourself from the bond of yourself. And in that sense, the exodus from Egypt is actually, as I said, the ability to get away from addiction and similar kinds of things. So here we go. I'm going to share the screen. So we actually moved on to a little bit more here. Lauren, do you want to explain what you were saying, please, in the chat?
No, I was just answering the question.
What was the question? I'm sorry.
Oh. Okay, I don't know why it came out to go to everyone, so it doesn't matter. It's not pertinent.
Okay, all right.
Sorry about that.
Okay, very good. So we're on, that's okay. Thank you for explaining it. All right. So we're on to verse 3. So the verse 2 had to do with saying that this new moon was going to be the first of the new moons of the year. So in other words, Nisan essentially is the new moon we're talking about, and that would be the first of the month, the first month. The ER would be the second month, etc. And now we get into the actual mitzvah itself. Dabru el kol adat Yisrael lemor. Speak, and I believe this, I could be wrong, but I do believe there ought to be a dagesh in there. But we have to check in other texts as well. Speak to the entire.
Mine has one.
Yep. It's just.
Mine has a dagesh.
Yeah, it makes yours is a more carefully edited text.
Sometimes not.
Right. Well, we know there's only one ultimate perfection. So anyway, speak to the entire community of Israel, Lamor saying. In other words, quote, as Dr. Pamela Barmash says, she translates Lamor as quote. Be'asor lachodesh hazeh, on the 10th of this month, on the 10th of this month. That's why it was important to know which month we were talking about, right? And now I'm sure we're going to have a ton of stuff. There we are, okay. Vayakhu lachem ish te levet avot. Every man, right? Well, or a man should take for themselves a sheep for their paternal home, paternal house. Se labayit, a sheep to a house. And of course, this is begging for some interpretation as to what we're talking about. So Rashi is certainly going to try to clarify what exactly we're talking about. And because we're talking about just something sort of general in terms of mitzvahs, because we look at this ton of Torah Tamima that starts to appear in the text, that because it has to do with divine commandment, there is a deep necessity to try to be as accurate as possible, because we're now we're talking about behavior and what we're going to do. And the idea of trying to focus so much on our behavior so that we try to do the mitzvah as accurately as possible, because that is a way of showing love for the divine. So that's why you'll see how Rashi is going to try to analyze this. We have a book called the Mechilta. This is extant. It's a halachic midrash, meaning that it's a midrash that begins a process of analyzing the scriptural text in such a way to describe various situations, as you will see. And by the way, I should say right now that what is so cool about the mitzvah we're about to read is that I think it actually presents an example of oral Torah in the written Torah. So let me just to clarify what I'm talking about. I know some of you know what I'm talking about, but there may be some people who aren't familiar with this idea, is that there is a Torah shebichtav, meaning a written Torah, and that is referring to this text that we're reading here. And that along with this written Torah that God gave Moses, there was along with it an oral Torah that wasn't written down, but was a way of interpreting and looking at the various circumstances that come up in attempting to practice the written Torah. And of course, the metaphor we use is that God gave Moses this written Torah, word for word, that every word in the Torah is actually of a divine origin. And I know that for some that stretches their credulity, but to my mind, it's really, again, if we try to look at it more from a literary point of view, that what we're really trying to say is just how significant the words are in the written Torah, that they require a level of interpretation and concentration and focus and meditation that might not be necessary if we didn't consider them, if we didn't look at them as if they are divinely given. Having said that, do I believe they are divinely given? Yes, I do, because I believe that God ultimately controls everything that we do, and that where this came from, where these words came from a very beautiful and holy, holy, holy place. And so to my mind, yes. So to say that God dictated each word is simply a way of trying to express the significance of each and every word and how they all require a meditation and consideration, etc., etc. The oral Torah, on the other hand, is the attempt to make the written Torah applicable. And the only way you can make it applicable is to look at the various circumstances that life presents us and find the most accurate way that you can to apply these particular concepts. And in that sense, I love the idea that the oral Torah is the means by which we bring this Torah that could be seen as idealistic, i.e., in heaven, and bring it down to earth and saying, no, this isn't just a bunch of good ideas. This is something we're actually supposed to try and put into our lives in a very practical kind of way. And so the oral Torah, because it deals with circumstances and trying to mine out every possible nuance in the written Torah, is the way in which the Torah that is in the heavens comes down onto the earth. And we are able to then actually practice this oral Torah. The idea, at least, the idea is for us to try and do this as accurately as we can. And that's one reason why there's just so much interpretation here, and it's certainly not exhaustive at all. It's infinite, all right? It's ongoing, because the circumstances of living are just infinite in how they get applied. So we'll take a look a little bit so we get at least a taste of the kind of analysis that's going on. And as I said, in this written Torah that's coming up, we will see that it discusses circumstances, which is exactly what the oral Torah attempts to deal with. So, and I like to sometimes give the example of there's theoretical mathematics and there's applied mathematics. And theoretical mathematics obviously would be the written Torah, and applied mathematics would be the oral Torah. So, Dabru el kol adatz, speak to the entire community. And this is plural, right? Because it started off saying that God spoke to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt. So, Dabru, speak, both of you, right? The two of you speak. So we're going to see the Mechilta, this halachic midrash, starts to analyze every possible nuance here, and here we go. And the midrash itself says, "V'chi Aaron medaber." Wait a second, it's saying, since when is Aaron speaking? It says both of you speak, but only Moses. We know v'halo kfar ne'emar. And we already read elsewhere in the text. It says atat tedaber. You, i.e. Moses, because God is addressing Moses back in that passage. You shall speak. You shall speak. So that's Moses. Since when is it plural? So here we go. Look at this beautiful attempt to understand and harmonize this particular thing. Ella, however, the way we need to understand this is cholkin kavod ze laze. That is to say that Moses and Aaron each attributed honor to the other. They were loving brothers, and they were dividing up, lachalok, to divide up honor one to the other, the omrim ze lazeh, and they would say to each other, lam, I believe this should be lam lamdaini, if I'm reading this correctly, and there are no misprints here. Teach me. V'hadibur yotzeh mibein shnehem. And consequently, the divine word comes out from between the two of them. Ki ilu shnehem medabrim, as if both of them are speaking. So this is the dabru, the understanding of dabru. You speak, meaning to allow each other, right? To do this in unity, to be fully with each other when you're doing this. Now, exactly what's going on here, it's possible that Torah Tamima explains this further. Lauren, am I reading this word correctly? Lamdaini?
Well, I don't have vowels in my Rashi.
Oh, okay. I don't know how else to, but it is the yud at the end. That's important. There's a yud at the end of that word in your text. You're
Sorry,
checking.
just a second. Okay.
Verse 3 in the
Yeah.
Rashi.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
The first Rashi, or
Yes, it is. It's the first Rashi.
I'm looking for the word. Yes, there's a yud.
Okay, so it has to be lamdaini.
I would think so.
Teach me. In other words, Moses says to Aaron, teach me. And Aaron says to Moses, teach me. Teach me what we're about to say. Okay, onwards. Thank you, Lauren. Only because, as you know, I can't always rely on the printing here. It sometimes gets smudged and blocked and stuff like that. Okay. El kol adat Yisrael le'mor lachzor b'chzor chodesh. To the entire community of Israel, saying on the 10th of the month. So the question that I think Rashi is trying to deal with here, okay, and he's quoting again the Mechilta, right? He's going to be saying the Mechilta, quoting from the Mechilta, or at least referring back to the Mechilta quite a bit. Is God saying to Moses and Aaron, you need to tell them on the 10th of the month? And that's, you'll see, that isn't what it means. So, Dabru Hayom, speak today. He's paraphrasing God speaking to Moses and Aaron. Speak today on Rosh Chodesh, because that's what the opening sentence was referring to, was saying that this particular Chodesh, and he was speaking to them on the first day of the month, right? This, on Rosh Chodesh, right, you should speak. That they should take it, that is what is going to be referred to, that is the lamb, etc., on the 10th of the month. So they're to speak to the Israelites on the first of the month, referring and telling them that on the 10th of the month, they're to take this lamb. Hazeh. So hazeh is a demonstrative pronoun, this. And because it's a demonstrative pronoun, it means that God is demonstrating something. In other words, pointing to something. So let's take a look. Sorry, that's not, okay, forgive me. I made a mistake. Forgive me. So it's true, of course, what I said about it being a demonstrative pronoun. But here it says Be'esor lachodesh hazeh, on the 10th of this month. And why doesn't it just say on the 10th of the month? Wouldn't they understand the same thing? So the issue is, what is the diuk? What's the point of this word hazeh? And that's what Rashi is going to tell us. So he says, this particular month, this particular Nisan is how he's understanding it. That is to say, Pesach Mitzrayim, I'm going to say Mekho Ba'asor. In the Pesach they observed in Egypt, that very first Pesach, they took the lamb on the 10th of the month. So this month, as opposed to, that is this Nisan in Egypt, as opposed to Lo Pesach Dorot, and not all subsequent Pesachs, the Pesach of generations. So that we know that there were certain unique things, unique customs, unique mitzvahs regarding the very first Pesach that took place prior to the slaying of the firstborn in Egypt, as opposed to all subsequent Pesachs that we observe. And that's hazeh. So Rashi and the Mechilta want us to understand, again, looking so carefully at every single word and understanding it. And please forgive me. I'm sorry. I was confusing it and conflating it with another instance of hazeh. Okay, so, and that's in the very first sentence of, or second sentence of Genesis chapter 12, where it says, HaChodesh Hazeh, this new moon. And in that case, it explains that God is pointing the shape of the new moon to Moses. And that's why I made this mistake here. Okay, so every person is every man, right, is to take a lamb for his father's house, his ancestral home. Okay. So, se levet avod. So you have, right, an ancestral home, or the daddy or the granddaddy or the great granddaddy and all the relatives who come from that paternal line, right? So he says le mishpacha achat. He says per family. All right. Well, how do you define family? How big is that family? Is the family, let's assume that here we mean surviving family, and we might be talking about, let's say, a grandfather, a grandfather and all his descendants, right? All his male descendants and the families that came from his sons and their sons, etc., etc. All right. Hooray. So he says, here we go. This is oral Torah. Hare shehayu merubim. What happens? Let's consider the circumstance, right? That's very large, right? One's pair of grandparents could have how many? They could have 30, 40 people, okay? Yachol se echad lechulam. Is the Torah telling us that they're to take one lamb? Because it says se, one lamb, for all of them. In other words, you take one lamb and you're supposed to divide it up amongst 30 people or maybe more. Remember, we talked about how the Israelites were multiplied in the land of Egypt, and potentially it could have been huge, right? And what about the fact that they were polygamous back there? So one man could have several wives, and each one of those wives could have quite a lot of children. So Talmud Lomar Zelabayit. And he's saying to us, this is why it repeats the term Sel Labayit, a lamb to a household. So 30, 40, 50 people aren't living in the same house, but you take it each one according to their the household in which they're living. And that's why this is repeated. Se levet avot. In other words, it's supposed to be divided up. Each lamb is apportioned to a family. And yet, at the same time, if the family is huge, right, in a case of that, then certainly we would divide it up according to the homes in which they're living. I'm going to do a little more, even though we are running out of time. So here, ve'im, oh my gosh, there is the oral Torah coming in. But if, what's but if introduce? It introduces a circumstance. Now, this little piece here was an implication taking out in understanding how these words are to be interpreted. But here it's very clear. But if, at habayit, suppose the home is too small, there are too few people. There are only two people, a husband and a wife, or a husband and a wife and one or two children, and a lamb, there's going to be a lot of leftovers on that lamb. And we're going to find out that because this is a special type of sacrifice, you don't want leftovers. We know that leftovers are very familiar. But on the other hand, you serving a guest, for example, leftovers has an implied act of disrespect. So anyway, we don't want leftovers, and the Torah is anticipating that here. But but if the house be too small, meheyot miseh, to be able to, we need to understand, to be able to consume a lamb. Look at what goes on here. Velakachu ushcheno, and he should take, and his neighbor. He and his neighbor should take. Hakarov el beito, his neighbor who is close to his home. Memichsat nefashot, according to the number of souls. Ish lefi ochlo, a man according to his eating. In other words, and this is all going to require further interpretation, but look at what we're saying here, that we so want the lamb to be fully consumed that even though the initial mitzvah has to do with members of your family, blood relations, let's say, for argument's sake, nevertheless, if it turns out that that's too small, you can go to your next door neighbor. And they may not be related to you at all. Okay. Circumstances alter cases. Tachosu al haseh, you shall count towards the land. And we'll stop.
Yeah, but what happens if, okay, I know this is going into all the details, but I'm just curious.
Yes.
So what happens if your neighbor already also has a lamb? I mean, basically, that what happens in that case?
Yes. Yeah. That's a very good question, but I think ideally, of course, you plan, right? I mean, this is telling you plan ahead, right? But if your neighbor, again, it means designating the lamb, right? In other words, have you designated this lamb as to be your Pesach sacrifice, and your neighbor has also designated his lamb. But the truth is, before you designate the lamb, if you've studied this mitzvah, you know that if you know already that your home is too small to consume the entire lamb, should you have designated the lamb in the first place? All right. So don't get me wrong. Your question is still good because the oral law has to deal with mistakes. Mistakes are part of reality. And so let's suppose, you haven't fully followed the law because the law was telling you that before you designate the lamb, make sure that you're able to fully consume the lamb, that there are enough people in your home to consume the entire lamb, and you didn't. So what do? Now you have two designated lambs. So you'd have to go speak to your rabbi, and your rabbi would have to say, well, look around, see, get on the phone, get on the internet, send messages, see if there's anyone else in your community who hasn't yet designated a lamb that can share with you, right? But you're going to go out and find. But we haven't finished this. This example, I don't want to be a spoiler, give you a spoiler alert, okay? We are absolutely talking about circumstances here. And I'm going to stop, at this point, I'm going to stop the share and stop the recording. So.